We've seen protests across the land, and primarily here in Colombo, where protesters have remained in situ for nearly 60 days, demanding changes to the way the country is being governed. But here are two questions that have often been asked. What is a protester's right? What is a fine line that divides a peaceful protest? And when is the law forced to step in? Well, I invited Thyagi Ruwanpathirana, researcher South Asia and Sri Lanka for Amnesty International, to give us some answers to these questions and a few more. Welcome, Thyagi, to Selinko Life Let's Talk. What actually should protesters, specifically at Golf-Face, be aware of? What is a protester's right?
Sri Lanka's constitution, as well as international human rights law, to which Sri Lanka is obliged to participate with because we're a party to the International Covenant for Civil Political Rights, that guarantees our basic civil political rights. So that includes the right to protest, peaceful assembly, freedom of expression, all of that. So that means that the state has a duty to make sure that people's right to protest, peaceful assembly in this case, is protected. And actually, it's a bit more expansive than that as well, in that means that the state also has to facilitate peaceful protest.
So what is the fine line that separates a peaceful protest from when the law is forced to step in?
So law enforcement does have a duty and obligation also for the protection of others to step in when there is, something that might harm the rights of others. But that doesn't mean that this can be used as an excuse. So for example, in a protest, if there are a handful of people who are causing a riot, that doesn't mean that the state can step in and wholesale shut down the protest. You have to take only necessary and proportionate action and then allow the others to go ahead. And even this, first you have to try peaceful means like negotiating and trying to de-escalate the violence. A step above that could be, if it's necessary, then you have to look at what are the less lethal means of doing this. Because even things like we see water cannons, tear gas used all the time, they can actually harm people and have long-term health repercussions. So those shouldn't be used. Say, for example, tear gas can't be used in an enclosed space. And then if you talk about lethal force, that can only be justified in a place where you have to protect the right to life and where there's a certain law enforcement goal, and only as far as that goal can be achieved.
So does a person have economic rights, and if so, what are they, and how is this crisis actually infringing on them or impacting them?
Rights are basically two types of rights, right? Civil political rights is one, economic, social, cultural rights are the other one. And Sri Lanka is a party to both of these international covenants. And this is a fantastic example in Sri Lanka's case, how civil political rights are being violated as a consequence of people demanding for the economic, social, cultural rights. So economic, social, cultural rights means that, and we are a party to that covenant, means that you have a right to say right to food, right to education, right to a good standard of living, things like that. And the state has a positive obligation as far as resources are forthcoming to provide that. This right is only sort of enforced to the extent that it's towards the progressive realization of this right. It's not a complete given because of resource constraints, and the law recognizes that.
So what is the state mandated to do for its citizens?
There is an obligation also for the state, and also state has an obligation to reach out to others for assistance in this type of situation. So it's not expected by international law for the state itself to be able to provide all of this because these resource constraints are there. So that's why I think right now the state has to look for international assistance, which it has no choice to do also, and it's doing right now.
Do citizens have a recourse if the state fails them?
Our constitution it recognizes economic, social, cultural rights, but it's not in the fundamental rights chapter. So if it was in the fundamental rights chapter, then people can go to court. Because there's no economic, social, cultural rights in the constitution explicitly. It's there in terms of like provincial councils, obligations and things like that. But and also you can go, say for example, if there's a discrimination or equality argument that can be made, but it's not lined out as one of your core fundamental rights. In many ways, Sri Lanka says it's a sovereign country, we decide our matters, but then this is a situation where we're literally not an island. We are a part of a community of states. We have obligations to the people, and the people and the world has an obligation to us as well.
Thank you, Thyagi. You actually fleshed out some of the questions that we ordinary citizens have a lot to ask about but don't get the answers for. So thank you very much for doing that for us today.
My pleasure.
Keep us on your radar, subscribe and follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram and LinkedIn.
World of risks and obstacles, we are there to help you reach your goals. With 12 billion rupees worth of customer benefits in 2020 and a life insurance fund worth over 100 billion rupees. Our strength is your strength. You focus on your goals. We will take care of the risks. Sri Lanka Life.